Find Me in Your Dreams, a fantasy novel by Victoria Veles. We Are the Dreamers series. Book 1. Dedicated to all the weird ones. Did you know that the word weird derived from an Old English word wird, which meant fate? It would describe someone who had powers to control destiny. The word got a bad meaning with time as it was used to describe weird sisters. 3 fates. The deities who governed the destinies of humans. They would often be portrayed as odd, frightening, which led to the word starting to mean odd-looking, uncanny, strange, disturbingly different. If you have ever been called weird, know that you have the power to create your own destiny. For all the weird ones out there, the ones who don't fit in, the ones who feel like they don't belong, let's create our own destiny. Let's make this world a colorful affair, shining bright with our individual lights. It's time to stop hiding our weirdness. Together, let's envision a new reality. One that celebrates each person's unique individuality instead of condemning it. I hope one day, people will proudly speak of being the weird ones. Of being different. Of being the dreamers. Introduction. The emotional realm was like deep waters. Wading through it was a challenge. Navigating it was frustrating. You might ask me, what do you feel? And I wouldn't know what to tell. I wouldn't be able to pinpoint one particular emotion. All I knew was that I was drowning. I was close to drowning every single day. All of my energy was spent keeping my head just above the water. You might ask me, why do you feel so down? And I would tell you that living is hard and that drowning is easier. But there was a part of me that wasn't ready to give up. That part wanted to keep on fighting, and so I would fight every single day. Every day I would fight back that feeling that wanted to pull me under. But this was the time to surrender, not as a sign of defeat, but as the first step towards change. I would stand and face it, because the pain of living this way outweighed the pain of fixing it. So it would have to be that, no games, no pretenses, no self-pity and no complaints. Well, maybe just a few complaints. After all, slaying dragons was not an easy job. But hopefully it will be all worth it at the end. In fairy tales, there is always a reward after the dragon has been slain. Let's hope that there is a reward waiting for me at the end of my journey. Chapter 1. This World You Cannot See. My memory was as fickle as a deep underwater cave, sheltering images from the past in its dark depths. It was hard to know what exactly was hiding there. Sometimes, it would be weeks, even months, for a particular memory to surface, reminding me of its existence. And sometimes it seemed as if by allowing myself to forget the past I would leave myself too carefree to keep up the proper defenses. That's why I didn't always know whether the memories were haunting me or I was haunting the memories, afraid to let go. And so the hunt would continue until one of us would fall, weary and worn by the ghosts of the past. But how I wished I could forget certain memories. Erase them from existence. Never for them to emerge again from the depths of my mind. Certain memories were too aggressive. They would attack me every time I let my guard down. Dreams were their favorite mode of communication. I had no way to defend myself then. This night wasn't any different. Memories from my parents' accident when I was just 8 decided to batter me yet again. In this dream, that kept on haunting me, I could see myself sitting at the back of a dark car. Pouring rain coming down outside the window. My parents were angry, arguing. Always arguing. I was trying to drown out the fighting by focusing on the sound of the rain hitting the roof of the car. I was thinking that it was good that Claire, my younger sister, wasn't here. She would start crying and it would make things even worse. She was too young to know that it was better to stay quiet. Luckily, she was staying at Nana's for a couple of days. I wished I could do the same, stay at Nana's, where I could just not have to deal with all this. But I had school to go to. From time to time, I would fantasize that my parents allowed me to switch schools to the one close to Nana's house and I could go there together with my friend Nora. I would often find escape in that fantasy, just as I was doing at this moment. But my thoughts were interrupted by my mother's shout telling my dad to watch out. And the rest was a blur. I could never see the whole picture clearly, just bits and pieces. I could recall the screeching of wheels on wet asphalt, the spinning motion, the loud noise from our car hitting something, the jolt that followed the hit, the smell of burning rubber, the sound of glass shattering, a scream of pain. And then there was darkness. Darkness that was now inhabited by monsters that have been haunting me ever since. I woke up with a jolt again, as I often did. With a sigh, I sat up on my bed, rubbing my face with my palms, trying to shake off the emotions that came all too vividly back to me. I told myself, just a dream that felt all too real. Fresh fall air was blowing through the window, ruffling the curtains. The day promised to be bright, unlike my inner world. All I wanted to do was to crawl back into the bed and go back to sleep, hoping that once I woke up, those memories would retreat back into the dark caves where they belonged. I sighed again and swung my feet off the bed. I couldn't let the distant shadows get to me. I had learned long ago how to live with them, how to skirt around them day by day. Today was no different, just another day to get through. I heard Nana's steps outside my bedroom door. The traditional knock followed shortly. "Wake up, my dear," she crooned in her cheery voice as she peeked through the door. Her face was lined with deep wrinkles, and her head was topped with gray hair, but she never lost her youthful spirit. "New day is here, and it looks wonderful." A small smile appeared on my face. Grandma was always able to see the brightness in the world. I wished I possessed the same quality, but it didn't seem to run in my genes. Apollo, my dog, didn't seem to think this day was particularly bright either. Most days he would be up and waiting excitedly at the door at the first sign of Nana's approach, but today he was still lazily stretching in his bed in the corner of my room. "Apollo, get up. Apparently, it's a wonderful day and it's eager to meet us." I tried to put some excitement into that statement, but I think I failed. He yawned again and finally trudged to my side. I gave him a rub behind his ear and a kiss on his forehead. Apollo came into my life 9 years ago, right after my parents' death. Nana thought that I needed something to cheer me up, so she adopted a puppy from a local rescue that brought stray dogs from communities up north. Apollo was an Iqaluit native brought to Ottawa when he was just a little puppy. The rescue told my Nana that he was an Iqaluit special, which meant that he was a unique mix of different breeds and they couldn't tell exactly what he was. We could tell that he was mostly Alaskan Malamute due to the thickness of his coat and his size. But his coloring wasn't quite right, lacking symmetry typical to the breed. His colors were a mixture of dark gray, white, and light brown distributed randomly over his coat, making him quite unique indeed. We suspected some border collie had something to do with his unusual coloring. But his piercing blue eyes were definitely part of his northern heritage. Apollo was a gentle giant. He was my solace ever since he came into my life. He always stayed by my side, providing me unspoken comfort in some of the hardest times, being the only witness to some of my darkest moments. I took another moment to mentally prepare myself for the day ahead and headed to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror. As expected, my face was drawn after a night like this. I had what was traditionally called a Black Irish appearance, an inheritance from my late father who immigrated from the United Kingdom before I was born. Black Irish came with navy blue eyes and jet black hair. My skin didn't tan well, so it tended to be on the paler side. Given that we lived in the great far north called Canada, my skin was quite pale most of the time, which showed dark circles under my eyes all too well. My name was also due to my cultural heritage, the full version being Katrina, which was of Gaelic origin. The short version of the name was Kate. But most people called me Kat. A childhood nickname that just stuck around. I was told that I was named after my other grandmother, my father's mother, whom I never had a chance to meet. From what little I knew, there was a rift between my father and his family, and that was part of the reason he moved to Canada. I turned the faucet and waited for the water to turn cold, then I spent a few minutes splashing it on my face, hoping it would make me just a little bit more presentable and prevent the look of concern on my Nana's face. Breakfast was almost ready when I came downstairs. The bright and cheerful kitchen was filled with sunlight and the sound of a song that Nana was humming as she prepared breakfast. Apollo sat dutifully at her side, his gaze fixed on Nana's every move in hopes that some of the food would make it to the floor. I sat down at the kitchen breakfast bar, which was used more often than the formal dining table in the other room. The kitchen was the heart of our home, where we spent most of our time together. Grandma was usually busy cooking, and after school, we would often join her with our homework assignments or just to chat over a cup of tea. The worn-out linoleum and white cabinets topped with random items and overflowing plant pots added to the coziness. Plants were everywhere, engulfing the kitchen in greenery. Pots with vines were located on top of the cabinets, always stretching and aiming their branches towards the light of the big window at the back of the kitchen. A shelf, that Nana made herself, in front of the window was filled with various herbs she used in cooking. Every other surface not taken up with various clutter was topped with a plant. It seemed like Nana could never get enough of them, whether it was outside or inside, always trying to find a place for just one more. Just then, I heard Claire, my little sister, clambering down the stairs. She was dressed in her usual eclectic fashion, leopard leggings peeking out from underneath a pink skirt. Her bright red hair was in its usual disarray, reminding me of a lion's mane. Just recently, she decided to add temporary red highlights to it, which clashed with the teal top she was wearing to complete the ensemble. I didn't know how, but she usually managed to pull it off. I credited that to her natural charisma and her lack of self-doubt. She was another cheerful one in the family. I often thought of her as a mini version of my grandmother. Both had an impish charm to them capable of breaking through even the hardest of defenses. Natural openness and passion for life were something I often envied, wishing I had more of it myself. Claire was 6 years younger than me, but it might as well have been a lifetime. We were nothing alike, always making me wonder how we could have been born into the same family.
I'm so excited for the science fair today,
Claire said once she bounced into the kitchen. She dropped her backpack on the floor and climbed onto the stool at the breakfast bar.
Paul and Simon will be showing this cool experiment where the volcano will be spewing lava. It won't be real lava, of course, but a mix of things that will react with each other.
She made a wide gesture with her hands, and I understood it meant an eruption of a volcano.
And then Katie and Ellis will be showing the chicks that they have been growing for the last month, only they were feeding them different things to see how they grow. Grandma, can we have some chicks? Katie and Ellis said that they weren't too much work at all and that they only feed them a few times a day and the rest of the time they just sit huddled around the lamp.
Claire continued in one breath. She could go on like this forever. Her 11-year-old mind was still excited about everything, and she never tried to contain her excitement, which would usually bubble up and spill over. Nana just smiled to herself as she was assembling the breakfast plates before bringing them over to where we were sitting. Why do you need to keep chicks in the cage if you have so many birds just outside our back door? She pointed to the back door leading to our backyard. She always had a great respect for nature and often said that she would prefer to see animals free rather than in a cage. Our backyard was a mini sanctuary, nestled in the rural outskirts of Ottawa. It was a lush expanse of greenery, bordered by a sturdy fence that marked the boundary between our tended land and the wild, untamed forest beyond. At night, we would often hear the howling of coyotes and the hooting of owls from the woods. Nana, with a special love for gardening, turned our backyard into a truly charming space. She spent numerous hours tending to her garden filled with colorful flowers, a variety of vegetables, and aromatic herbs. Her dedication to the garden was evident in every plant. In warmer months, Nana spent most of her time outdoors. Whether she was gently pruning, meticulously weeding, or lovingly watering, every plant thrived under her watchful eye. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. A few years ago, a local newspaper featured an article about her remarkable garden. They managed to capture the essence of her green haven, showcasing how her hands could turn even the simplest patch of land into a peaceful and inviting place. Claire's voice turned more whiny.
But Grandma, I cannot play with and hold those birds, and you can hardly see the chicks unless you climb to their nests, and you always said that birds don't like it.
What are you going to do once those chicks grow up to be adult chickens? They won't be cute and fluffy for too long, said Grandma, obviously determined to make Claire see the absurdity of her request rather than denying it flat out. She always tried to treat us like adults by explaining her decisions rather than just commanding.
Then we can set them free into the forest and they will join the other birds there.
Claire. They wouldn't know how to survive in the wild, making them easy prey for the predators out there. You wouldn't want them to be hurt, would you? Nana was gently looking into Claire's eyes while asking the question.
No!
Claire lowered her gaze to a toast in her hands, her shoulders slumping a bit. I wouldn't want them to be all alone. And scared in the forest.
I guess I can go and play with Kate's and Ellis's chicks, could I?
She raised her eyes in a pleading gesture. That you can do, Nana allowed with a smile. But remember, today after school we are going to visit your mom's and dad's graves. Yeah. I remember. Claire lowered her gaze once more. I knew she didn't like going to the cemetery any more than I did, but none of us ever said anything to our grandma. Once a year, the three of us would go together and visit the graves of our parents. Claire once told me that the cemetery felt sad, and I couldn't agree more. She was only 2 when our parents died in a car accident, so she hardly remembered them. A lot of her memories of our parents were formed from the pictures and videos of them. Unlike Claire, I remembered things all too well. Claire, let's go. Your bus will be here soon, I told her. Claire was still going to elementary school and would get a bus ride while I have been driving myself ever since I got my driver's license a year ago. The anniversary of my parents' death was usually a hard day for me for more reasons than one. I was eager to leave for school where I could be alone with my thoughts without needing to worry about how I looked like from the outside. See you, Grandma, I waved as we were heading out the door, leaving Nana sitting with a cup of tea in her hands and a deep look on her face, a look that often told me she saw more than she usually let on. Nana's house was located in the rural part of Ottawa. It was beautiful there, really quiet with a big forest nearby and a long sandy beach just a few streets away. But no buses would go there, so taking public transport wasn't an option. Before my driver's license, I would carpool with other kids from the area, but Nana and I decided that it was good to have another driver in the family, just in case. This also allowed me to help with chores and taking Claire to after-school activities. My high school was situated in a more urban area of Ottawa, surrounded by numerous shops. The closest store in Nana's neighborhood was a convenience store, half of which was dedicated to selling liquor, while the other half stocked all sorts of snacks and miscellaneous items. It was the kind of store you'd only visit out of necessity, yet you never knew what unexpected finds you might stumble upon. If you were lucky, you could find items that you would never come across in a big box store. There was even quite an extensive section for DVDs, likely catering to cabin dwellers without internet or cable TV access. On days like these, I like to crank up my music during the ride to school, using it to drown out my thoughts. I tuned into my favorite radio station, Hot 89.9 FM. I liked the banter of the morning show DJs on this particular station. This morning they were revisiting hits from the early 2000s. I was surprised to realize that many of them were favorites of mine that I hadn't listened to in a long time. In a way, it was sad that so many songs were so short-lived, even if they were really good. It made me wonder how those artists felt to put all that work into their songs for them to be forgotten in just a few years or even sooner, quickly replaced by a new hit. I recognized a song by Evanescence about a person asking to be saved from the darkness. I recalled it being their debut single. It was wildly popular back then. I remembered really liking this song, but somehow it's been a while since I listened to it. As I tuned into the lyrics, I was stunned. Was it the first time I actually listened to the words? Was it even the same song that I'd heard before? It sounded the same. But why did I feel like it was the first time I heard the lyrics? It really had quite a heavy feel to it that I'd never paid attention to until now. Weird that I've played this song so many times, but only now has it truly sunk in. I was still thinking about the song as I pulled into the school parking lot. Unfortunately, school failed to provide the distraction I desperately needed that day. I found myself in my English literature class, listening to Ms. Reynolds dissect Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. I had read it before. I knew it was an exploration of the American dream in the 1920s jazz age. It was another sad story, all too common, in which characters' lives became intertwined in a tragic pursuit of their desires. It wasn't enough to occupy my mind. I was plagued with a dilemma about what to say at my parents' grave later that day. It was the same problem every single year, and it filled me with dread whenever I thought about it. Unlike Claire, I had plenty of memories of my parents, but not too many of them were good. I did not witness a lot of love and happiness between them. Most of my memories were filled with their arguing and dismissing each other in one form or another. It was hard growing up in such a household. Their death was just another tragic event in the series of miseries that characterized their life together. However, visiting my parents' grave demanded the recollection of good memories, and that was always the part one struggled with. Every good memory I had was tangled with a myriad of negative ones. Like when I was 5 and my father was teaching me to ride a bicycle. I was so happy when I finally managed to keep my balance and ride down our street. Only for that memory to be overshadowed by my mother coming out of the house to shout at my father for letting me ride where a car could hit me. Or when we took a family trip to Disneyland, which would have been a bright and joyful memory if not for their constant arguing, both of them losing their temper trying to decide where to go and what to do. I often felt like their problems were bigger than any of us, consuming and overshadowing everything else that was happening in our family. Miss Kamlanowire, can I interest you in the material I am teaching today? Asked Ms. Reynolds, pulling me out of my thoughts. I hated when teachers used my last name. They always butchered the pronunciation, saying it Kamlanowire instead of Kivnor. Of course, I couldn't blame them, it was a complicated surname. I just wished they wouldn't bother trying, and would use my first name instead. Claire and I used to have our mother's last name, which was Howard, a much simpler one. But, a couple of years ago, I asked my grandma to change my last name to my father's. I always felt like it resonated more with me even though it was mispronounced most of the time. Nana wasn't thrilled with that idea at first, but I managed to convince her, and eventually, she helped me to do it. I'm sorry, I said, embarrassed. It wasn't unusual for me to space out, but I still didn't like to be caught in the process. I tried to pay more attention for the rest of the class, but I only partially succeeded. As the third hour finished, I headed to the counselor's office. After my parents died, the school assigned a counselor to help me to deal with the grief. The sessions were more frequent at first, but in the last couple of years I only had to attend a few meetings at the beginning of the school year around the anniversary of my parents' death, and then once every quarter. "Hello, Kat." Miss Julie smiled warmly from her usual spot in her office, nestled in a comfy mustard-yellow armchair. She was a new counselor at our school, probably not more than 10 years older than my 17. Miss Julie exuded a gentle aura of warmth and non-judgment that made it easy to open up to her, unlike Ms. Burine, our previous counselor who retired last year. Ms. Burine always managed to make me feel like I've done something wrong, and she was there to convict me of it. Even Miss Julie's appearance reflected her gentle ways. She had soft golden hair she would usually put in a bun, big brown eyes with thick eyelashes, and a heart-shaped face. Altogether, she presented a picture of softness and kindness that emanated from every feature. "Hi, Miss Julie," I replied, sinking into the teal couch across from her. The bright colors of her office always lifted my spirits. Alongside the mustard armchair, there was a vibrant red ornamental rug and a bookcase with books arranged by their hue, forming a rainbow behind Miss Julie's back. "How was school today?" she asked in her pleasant manner. "Fine," I said, not quite meeting her gaze. I knew right away what she was asking about, but I didn't feel like going there. "I know today must be difficult for you," she continued, her tone understanding. "I'm fine," I repeated, hoping she would get a hint and change her line of questions. "I've been told by your teachers that you seem distracted and unfocused in class." I gritted my teeth. Did she have to be so persistent? "I'm doing my best," I replied curtly, some of the irritation seeping through. "Nobody is blaming you for anything, we are just concerned and want to see you happy," Miss Julie said, compassion in her eyes. "Do you think I don't want to be happy?" Irritation was definitely winning in this argument. "It's just not as easy for some people as it is for others," I explained, with all the patience I could muster. Miss Julie just silently watched me, her calm demeanor unwavering. Guilt immediately crept in. It happened every time I allowed myself to lose my temper and let through anger and irritation. It always seemed to be just below the surface. I glanced out of the window, waiting for Miss Julie to say something. I didn't trust myself to speak. It was so much harder to control myself when I did. "You've been through a lot, and it's understandable for you to have the feelings you do. Our minds can only take on so much before they start to feel overwhelmed. It would be unnatural for you to be carefree and happy all the time. I would think there was something wrong with you if you were," Miss Julie said with a gentle smile. I intertwined my fingers and looked down, not fully accepting provided explanation. Miss Julie didn't know half of it. She didn't know all the shameful emotions that constantly plagued me. I never bothered to explain them to her. I was ashamed of them myself. I wasn't about to confess them to someone else. She wouldn't understand, not a lovely person like her. She probably hadn't even had an ounce of the dark thoughts I had in my mind. Miss Julie interrupted my thoughts. "You see, our inner world, our psyche, is not that easy to explain. We are often taught that there is one right way to think and feel, one right way to be. It's a black and white kind of thinking, good versus bad. We're taught that we're always supposed to like what's good for us, automatically dislike what's not. Be grateful for people who are helping us. Reject those who hurt us, and so on. But our mind is so much more complicated, so much more intricate. It has this amazing ability to adapt to whatever is happening in our lives, to ensure that we survive in whatever conditions we're in. Survival is its main priority. Not happiness, not love, not joy, but our ability to carry on despite everything. And when I say survive, I don't just mean physically, that's less of a concern in our modern world. Most of the time, survival means receiving the love, care, and nurture that we need. It means being accepted by our environment. Whether it's our family, our social circle, or our culture. So you see, our inner world is much more complicated than what we often make it out to be. But there's freedom in that realization. Because once we see that, once we truly grasp that, she clenched her hand into a fist as she spoke. Then opened it up as if releasing something into the air. We set ourselves free from the judgment we place on ourselves for not feeling the way we think we should. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? I nodded. I understood that she was saying that the judgment and expectations we place on ourselves are often much harsher than what we experience from the world around us. There was so much kindness on Miss Julie's face as she said, "I wish this world was a perfect place. I wish it didn't have so much pain and suffering. I wish no kid had to ever experience what you've been through." That's the reason I decided to do this type of work, to ease some of the suffering that is out there. To help kids like you to be just a little bit more kind to themselves and understand that how they feel is not their fault. That there is certainly a good reason to feel that way, even though it might not be very obvious. She took a pause and said with an exhale, "To be honest, this world can be a lot to handle even for the best of us. In the best of circumstances. Let alone if circumstances are far from perfect. So let's just accept that your circumstances have been far from perfect and you've done your best to adapt to them. And you have done an amazing job in that. Now, let's see whether there is a way for you to also be happy." With a smile, she asked, "Deal?" I returned her smile with a crooked one. "Deal," I said. Something in her speech touched me on a deep level. I didn't even realize how much I needed to feel understood and accepted without any judgment. And then Miss Julie took me completely by surprise by saying, "So today, we are going to learn how to tame lions." Tame lions. I repeated, confused. Maybe the reason she could understand me so well is because both of us were a little bit out of our minds, I thought to myself. Yes, it relates back to the feelings that we think we shouldn't have. You see, we are not taught to accept and understand feelings that don't fit into this imaginary list of the acceptable emotions to have. We are taught to reject, suppress, and hide them from ourselves and people around us. We make monsters, wild untamed lions out of them that we want to hide. The problem is that those feelings, those parts of us that we have rejected, don't just go away. They stay locked up deep inside of us, in little cages that we put them in. And they can stay relatively quiet for a long time. But there usually comes a time when we can't manage to contain them anymore. And in those brief moments the lions get out. And when they do get out, they are usually not tame kittens, they are raging wild animals that were locked up for far too long and don't know how to behave adequately in this world. Nobody ever explained to them, with patience and love, how they need to behave. After a brief pause, Miss Julie asked, "So do you think that maybe you have a lion inside that needs to be loved?" I replied with a chuckle, "I think I have a whole zoo. Do you think it might be time to release them into the wild? Let them be free?" She asked and quickly added, "But first tend to them, tame them so they don't hurt anyone." "Yeah. That would be cool," I said reluctantly, even though I had no idea how she was going to tame my monsters. They weren't just big kittens that needed to be loved. They were massive dragons that were eager to get out and spread their wings and burn everything to ashes on their path. Miss Julie continued, "I would like you to try something new, something that might help you gain a level of control over all those emotions within you. Would you be interested?" I shrugged. I didn't think I would ever be able to gain control over those aspects of me, but it was easier to just agree. "To start, I would like you to try meditation. It should help to calm your mind a bit, allowing you to sit with your thoughts and emotions rather than just react to them." Meditation sounded like the last thing I wanted to do. How was sitting with my emotions supposed to help me if my emotions were the problem to begin with? I already had a hard time keeping my head above water in the sea of emotions I was swimming all the time. I didn't need to sit with them too. But I didn't say anything. Trying to explain myself was usually one of my triggers, and it wasn't the time for my dragons to get out. I would just blow up and beat myself up about it later. So, I nodded my head and said, "Okay." "Great," Miss Julie brightened up, pleased that I seemed willing to accept her methods. "I will give you a track you can play on your iPod. It will guide you through meditation. Try to do it at least once a day in a quiet place. The secret to controlling the raging lion is not letting it sneak up on you," she said with a smile. "We need to be aware of it so we can stop it in time before it gets out of control. Meditation will help you be aware of your feelings and emotions so you can keep track of them. It's like a security camera," she explained with a smile, often finding her own analogies amusing. "Watch the lions from a safe distance, that way, you can put measures in place to maintain control. It's much harder to regain control when a raging lion is leaping at you from behind." Later that day, I didn't feel like going inside the house once we returned from the cemetery. Emotions brought up by the visit were still churning inside me. I didn't want to accidentally unleash my dragons on Nana or Claire. So I grabbed Apollo and headed to the forest that stretched out just beyond our garden gate. Fall was my favorite season, and September was usually the best month of the year. It was still warm but fresh, not as stuffy as some of the summer months. Bugs were already gone, making it the perfect time to be out in nature. The leaves were still green, but there were patches of yellow, red, and orange here and there. Nature was preparing to drift to sleep, and I could feel that calmness in the air. I followed the path leading from our backyard into the forest. Golden rays of sun were streaming through the leaves, creating their own type of magic. As I wandered through the forest, breathing in the calm, I hoped it would relieve my inner turmoil that never seemed to be completely gone. Sometimes, I wished there were no people around me who could be hurt by the emotions bubbling inside me. Sometimes I felt that my family, or whatever was left of it, would be better off without me. Maybe then, I wouldn't feel the guilt that always came following my outbursts. Miss Julie's words came to mind. Could meditation really help? I was doubtful. It was like dousing a raging forest fire with morning dew. It was just so frustrating that I could never seem to get a handle on the anger that always simmered in me. There were moments when it was further away, not as close to the surface, but it was never too far out of reach. I sighed. Well, I guess it wouldn't hurt to try meditating. What's the worst that could happen? I found a comfortable-looking stump of a large tree that had been cut down a while ago, just off the path. I sat there, crossing my legs. Bright colors of the forest and rays of light were all around me. For a moment, I felt like I belonged there, feeling the tranquility of the woods surrounding me. There was something majestic about the tall trees towering over me, welcoming me into the heart of the forest, providing shelter and calm from the storm inside. I took out my iPod and navigated to the meditation track that Miss Julie had given me. Putting my headphones in, I closed my eyes and took a long breath. A calm female voice in the track was instructing on how to breathe. Take a breath on the count of 4. Hold your breath on the count of 7. Breathe out on the count of 8. I did as instructed, following the voice in the track. The fire inside me seemed to be subsiding. As if a fresh breeze had started to blow, cooling down the heat. After some time, everything else seemed to disappear. It was just me and my breath. My body seemed to relax. As if it was being released from the invisible hold I didn't even know was there. The meditative music continued to play in the background of the track, with flute and running stream sounds providing further calm. It took a few moments for me to notice that other sounds started to trickle in, mixing with the forest sounds in the background and the music in the headphones. At first, I thought they were part of the track I was listening to. weird high-pitched noises. It sounded like a mix of sounds that didn't seem to belong in the meditation track. I listened more carefully, trying to maintain the brief state of calm I had been able to achieve, but the sounds started to grow louder and louder. I opened my eyes, needing to know what was going on. The forest was darker now, full of longer shadows. The golden light had disappeared as I meditated. But everything else was the same. I took out my headphones and listened for the source of the noise, but it seemed to be gone as unexpectedly as it had appeared. I stood up and looked around. There was nothing, just the same forest I had wandered in since I was a kid. Nana's house was far in the distance just down the path. I could hear the hooting of an owl and some other birds, but nothing else. Then all of a sudden, the noise started again, this time louder, and it wouldn't stop as I turned around, trying to locate the source. Apollo started to bark at something, and I swirled my head around, searching for the cause of his distress. That's when I saw a young guy standing about 15 feet away, watching me. It was unexpected to see him there. I hadn't heard anyone approach. I didn't even realize I wasn't alone. My heart started to frantically jump in my chest. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw the same surprise in his eyes that I'm sure was in mine. And the next moment, he wasn't there anymore. The place where he stood just moments ago was empty. My heart jumped up again, my breathing fast. I scanned the area, trying to see where he could have gone. There was nothing indicating that he was there just a minute ago. The forest was quiet, the noise was gone, and I was all alone as far as I could tell. Apollo was still barking like a mad dog at the spot where the guy was standing. An unease spread over me. I picked up my bag from the tree stump I was sitting on and told Apollo, "Let's go home." We headed back, both of us on guard. As I reached Nana's garden, the darkness had engulfed the forest completely. The house looked like a safe haven with bright lights streaming through the windows. I crossed the garden gate that separated our backyard from the wild nature around. As I locked it, I threw a last glance at the forest and the deep shadows that lay there. Disconcerted, I headed in. Later that evening, as I was falling asleep, I kept listening to the sounds outside my window. But there was nothing but the usual rustling of leaves, occasional squeaking of the Canadian geese on their way south, and the howl of a coyote in the distance. Apollo was snoring peacefully beside me. There was nothing reminding of the high-pitched sound that resembled a badly tuned audio equipment. I sighed and allowed myself to drift to sleep.